I want to talk to you about the logical mind, the rational mind, because I don't think it's doing very well. I think we're living in a dark age of rationality where far too many people value fleeting emotion and vibes and instant gratification far more than they value objectivity, rationality, logic, and a more deliberate, consistent way of understanding themselves and conducting themselves. I don't think that's good, to each his own. This is not a video where I'm going to talk about the world today, but I do want to take you on a quick journey through the most important ideas that make up what I call the logical mind, because it's not just one thing, it's a multitude of things. And they're easy to understand, not necessarily easy to internalize, but let's just take them one by one. And we're going to start, how else, with the ancient Greeks. And I'm going to give you a couple of quotes. Plato, the first and best victory is to conquer self. Aristotle, I count him braver who overcomes his desires than him who conquers his enemies, for the hardest victory is over self. And to simplify things a little bit, I call this principle the stay calm principle. Don't act emotionally. I mean, we're human, we all feel emotion. Emotion is great, it's part of the human condition. But when you sense that you are over-emotional, don't take action, don't make decisions, don't overreact, don't rush into something, don't react emotionally. Calm down, take a deep breath, take 5 minutes, sleep on it if you can, come back the next day, reason the problem, think the problem, write it down, look at pros, look at cons, and make a rational decision. It doesn't have to be a perfect decision, but it has to be a rational decision. The second principle is don't get angry, get even. And I'm going to give you a quote by Marcus Aurelius. And Marcus Aurelius says that you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. And what he means by this quote is something happens. Whatever, someone close to you, the government, whoever did something happened and you don't like it. Or maybe you like it, but let's say you don't like it. How do you react? What exactly do you do? And a lot of people just get emotional about it and they start complaining about it and they start worrying about it and they start, bitching about it on the internet or whatever. But that's not real action. They're just a waste of time. What you need to do when you want to do something, or maybe you don't want to do something, but something happens, you need to ask yourself a couple of questions. The first question is, can I do something about it? Sometimes some things are actually totally, completely out of our control. If you cannot do something about it, then just put it aside. There's no point in worrying about things you cannot influence. It'd be stupid to worry that winter is coming. Winter is always coming. Yeah, you can prepare for winter, but that's the second part of it. The second question is, can you do something about it? And yeah, if you can do something about it, what is the cost of doing something about it? In terms of time, energy, opportunity cost, money, whatever. And then you have to decide if you want to do the thing you could do about it, because you have to pick your battles. You can't fight everything that annoys you. You have to pick your battles. You have to prioritize. And if you want to do something about it, then go do it. But not as an emotional reaction, oh, that pisses me off, I'm going to tell them something, but as a logical, rational, some frequently long-term, deliberate, persistent plan of action. And that's actually how you change things. And if you don't want to do anything about it, don't do anything about it. But we're back to the first case where just forget about it then. Makes no sense to worry about something that you either cannot influence or two are not willing to influence. And the third thing that behind the idea of the logical mind is formal logic. And formal logic is basically the study of logic as a scientific expression with formulas and numbers and letters and principles and rules, studying logic like a science. And the first one to do this is obviously Aristotle again. Where would we be without the ancient Greeks? And Aristotle came up with some formal logic rules like the syllogism, for example. And the syllogism is a series of 3 statements. And the first statement is all A's have the property of X. And the second statement is B is an A or a kind of A. And these are your assumptions. These are the things you have to know to be true. But if these are true, then you can make the third statement, which is B also has the property of X. So for example, if we say all fish can breathe underwater, and then we can also say that sharks are fishes, then we can deduce logically that sharks can breathe underwater. And the absolute beauty of formal logic is that it is universal in nature and categorical. 100% of the times it's true. As long as the assumptions are true, then your conclusion, you can be 100% certain about it, even if you've never seen a fish or a shark in your life. You don't have to go and study the sharks. You can make a logical deduction that is 100% certain, as long as your assumptions are correct. Another formal logic rule from back in the day of Aristotle is the modus tollens. And the modus tollens is if P implies Q, and we know this to be true, then we can automatically deduce that non-Q implies non-P. So for example, if I say that when I flip the switch, the light bulb goes on, so P implies Q, then I can automatically say that if the light bulb is not on, then I must have not flipped the switch. And some of you might think at this point, like, hey, but what if the switch is broken? What if the light bulb is broken? What if the wire is broken? True, that's right. But from a logical point of view, it doesn't matter. From a logical point of view, all that matters is that you have to break down the statement and apply it to the switch, apply it to each component of the system. But, as a logical example, if that assumption is correct, if you know the switch to be functioning, and you know the wire to be functioning, and you know the light bulb to be functioning, then that logical deduction, you can be 100% certain about it. And the beauty of formal logic is that it is one of the very few universal skills we have in this world, right? If I'm good at carpentry, that doesn't mean I'm good at cooking. And if I'm good at cooking, doesn't mean I can fly a plane. And if I can fly a plane, doesn't mean I can, be a doctor. Most of our skills are not transferable. We're good at one thing, and if you take us from that environment and you move us to a different place, we're not good at that thing anymore. But logic is a universal skill. As long as you are careful to apply it correctly and you check that your assumptions are correct, then no matter where and what we're talking about, you can be certain that your conclusion is correct. I just watched this 40-something minute video of a car mechanic diagnosing a very tricky electrical problem in a car just with a whiteboard. Just by understanding how the electrical circuit of that car works, and just by applying simple logical rules like the syllogism and the modus tollens, and understanding that if two things work at the same time, then that must mean that the third thing is always working. Or if one thing is working and another is not working, then that must mean that the problem is not here, but it could be there. Simple logical rules and logical thinking. And I think formal logic is particularly useful in these kinds of situations, like understanding things, diagnosing things, breaking big problems into smaller problems. All right, enough about the formal logic. Now let's move to the scientific method. And I'm going to think of Sir Isaac Newton. He's not the first one to apply it, but I think it's around that time in the world that people are starting to think about science in a scientific way, so to say. Human beings have been performing science for a very, very long time. It's arguable that the first two dudes that were banging two stones 1,000,000 years ago in Africa to create sparks and start a fire were in a way doing science, but doing science in a deliberate, formal way is a more recent development. Isaac Newton, in his theory of gravity, said that two objects in a gravitational field fall with the same speed and accelerate with the same speed. So if I drop two objects in the gravitational field of the Earth, they should, from the same height, and if I drop them at the same time, they should both touch the table at the same time. And this is obviously not true in what I've just seen in front of my eyes, because the paper took longer to reach the table. But the scientific method is what I just did. So the scientific method is the following. You can have any idea. You can say anything. I can say that I think pigs can fly. I can say that I think that if I do this, a genie will appear. I can say anything. But then, if I want to approach it scientifically, I have to devise an experiment, a test, that will conclusively prove if that's true or false. So I have to somehow devise an experiment to see if pigs can fly. That is conclusive, not something that's wishy-washy, maybe not today, maybe tomorrow, something definitive. In this case, if I drop these two things, I've devised an experiment, right? I've said that they should drop at the same speed, so the experiment seems very simple. I just drop them and see how fast they fall. But the experiment is imperfect because we have air. And there's friction, more friction from the paper with the air than from the bottle cap. So the paper is going to take longer to fall because of friction with the atmosphere. Now, does that mean that I've proven they fall at the same speed? No, I haven't yet proven that. I've just proven that this experiment is not well designed. What I would need is I would need a vacuum, like in the vacuum of space, or create an artificial vacuum in a chamber, and in that vacuum I should drop different kind of objects. Very heavy objects, very light objects, flat objects, sharp objects, all kinds of objects, and time them very professionally with a slow motion camera or whatever, and see if they fall at the same speed and accelerate at the same speed. And as it happens, they do. Now, I don't have a vacuum chamber to show you that, but that's how you devise an experiment. And this is the same way in which you do things in real life. Only that in real life, I would recommend you apply the next principle, which is divide and conquer, which is not the same thing, but very similar with iterative progress. So for example, it's considering the scientific method, I say that, look, I think that if I work really hard for 10 years at whatever idea, I'm going to be able to build a great business around it. In the scientific method, that's my statement. Now I have to devise an experiment to prove it, true or false. Now, the easiest way to experiment that is to invest 10 years of my life working really hard on that idea. But that's a high cost. That's a big bet. That's a lot of risk. That's a lot of years. So how can I test that in some kind of an experiment without potentially wasting 10 years of my life? Well, divide and conquer. Take a big problem and break it down into smaller problems. And I'm going to think, how can I devise an experiment for 6 months or a year and understand what needs to happen in the first year or the first 6 months such that I know that I'm on the right track? Because I don't want to just work in the blind, just purely on faith alone for 10 years. I want to know I'm on the right track. So I'm going to devise a test, which is some milestones, some KPIs, whatever, that if I hit these things in a year, that I'm going to make the decision I'm on the right track. If I don't hit these things, I'm going to make the decision I'm not on the right track, and I've just wasted, quote unquote, a year, not 10. So divide and conquer is a great component of the logical mind, or iterative progress, iterative planning, iterative decision making, step by step. Do something relatively small, see what the feedback is, see how it goes, and then make the decision for the next step. Component of the logical mind is training and simulation. Everyone who does something at a high level, or even professional, not necessarily at a high level, they train. They train a lot, they prepare in simulated conditions. Again, the ancient Greek poet this time, I forget his name, I'll put it on the screen, Archilogos, I think, said that when shit happens, this is my edition, when shit happens, we do not rise to the level of our expectations, we fall to the level of our training. Everybody trains. Firemen train in simulated environments so they know what to do when they have to put out a fire. Soldiers train in a simulated environment so they know what they have to do when they're actually in a fight. Everybody trains. Athletes train. Even we train. If I have an important presentation with a client, I'm going to prepare for it. Maybe even simulate it with a couple of friends or a couple of colleagues and do a mock presentation in front of them to get feedback. Everybody who's serious about what they do train, and you should do that as well. Next component of the logical mind may be a bit counterintuitive, and I'm going to say is psychology and the non-rational, non-deterministic-ish part of the human mind. And I'm not going to talk about Freud, I'm going to talk about the person who inspired Freud, which is Nietzsche. And Friedrich Nietzsche was a German philosopher who lived in the 19th century, and he had a majestic mustache and a full set of hair, but that's a different conversation. And he came up with that famous saying that God is dead and we have killed him. And he was talking about the fact that during that time in Europe, the Christian value system was being discarded. People didn't want to behave in that way anymore. People wanted to free themselves from the constraints of the Christian and church's value system. And that's the metaphor that we have killed God. Okay, but what do we put in his place? Because for 2,000 years we have been operating under these rules, under these values, and now suddenly we have no rules. What do we do? And he continues in that quote, will we have to become gods ourselves? And his answer is basically yes, we will have to become gods ourselves, in the sense that we will have to decide for ourselves without an external reference what's good and what's bad, what's right and what's wrong. We may have to decide this at a collective level, as a group, as a country, as a whatever, and at an individual level. Every individual for themselves will have to decide what is the meaning of their life, what is worth pursuing in their life, and what not. And the solution he came up with was this concept of the Übermensch, the superhuman, which was a person who is capable of just deciding for themselves the things we just talked about, who doesn't need external approval, who doesn't need external validation, who doesn't need a book or another person or an institution to tell them how to behave. They just decide what they want to do. And a major component of Nietzsche's philosophy was this: there is no objective truth. There's no right and wrong. You just know yourself, understand yourself, and you'll have desires and you'll have urges and you'll have things you want, and just go for them, man. It's a kind of a more elaborate versions of Nike. It's just do it. Just do it. And the importance of Nietzsche is fundamental in the history of philosophy, because he was the first major philosopher to talk about the subjectivity of humanity. Most philosophers until before him, they're kind of looking at things from above in a godlike perspective, like, this is right and this is wrong, and this is like this and this is like that, and this is always like this and this is always like that. And they were kind of playing a top-down perspective of the game of life. But Nietzsche is like, you're going to feel whatever you're going to feel, you're going to want whatever you're going to want, and just do it. Get it done. Power of the will. How does that fit with the logical mind? Well, it fits in the following way. We are human and we have these things in ourselves. We have emotions, we have instincts, we have desires, we have urges, we have impulses, we have all these things. We cannot pretend they're not there. And we shouldn't pretend they're not there, because in my opinion, they enrich life. They make us who we are. But we need to understand which of them we want to follow, and then do it without regrets, without, maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. Just do it, just go for it. And we also need to understand which of them we don't want to follow, and don't follow them and suppress them. And this is related to that saying of, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war, which means that a lot of us may have all kinds of deep down thoughts that maybe they're not the nicest thoughts or the best thoughts or the most suited thoughts, but that doesn't define who we are. What defines who we are is what we choose to act on, and what we choose to do, and what we choose to don't do. So the warrior in the garden, he could choose violence, but he doesn't, because he's in a garden. But he has that in the back of his mind. If we need to, I can go warrior mode. Next principle. Well, it's not the next, it's a continuation of what I just talked about Nietzsche, But the more modern, more explicit form of that is the cognitive biases. And the cognitive biases are specific ways in which our minds fool us. It's thought processes that we get, and they feel very intuitive, and they feel right, but they're wrong. And that's what's tricky about them, because it's not like a dumb idea. It just feels right. It feels intuitive. And a lot of the times it's right, but sometimes it's critically wrong. There's hundreds of them, but let me give you a simple example. Selection bias. It applies in a million ways. But for example, when you buy a new car, for a couple of weeks, a month, you're going to spot the same model, maybe the same color as your car on the road everywhere. Like, hey, they got a car like me. Even though, objectively speaking, there's not so many cars out there, but the selection bias is that when you're looking for something, when your brain is looking for something, you're going to tend to see that, and you're going to tend to ignore, without realizing, other information. So for example, let's assume a judge or a jury is already convinced that someone is guilty before the trial even starts. Then they're going to be much more receptive and accepting of the information that confirms their existing belief than information that contradicts it. Or a lot of air crashes have happened because of a kind of a selection bias, which leads to a kind of tunnel vision. Because the pilots saw something, or they got an idea in their head, or they were so focused on fixing one problem, and they got tunnel vision, and they didn't see other things. They didn't think about the big picture. They didn't see other implications of what was happening. And they crashed because of that fixation, even though the thing they were fixated on was not necessarily the thing that ultimately led to the accident. Happens in business a lot, with businesses focusing on some aspects of their products or their market strategies, or what they think makes them competitive, and ignoring others. It happens in all kinds of situations. Another kind of cognitive bias is the recency bias, which says that people are much more impacted by recent information than older information. And we see this in the news all the time, right? Like, something that happened 6 months ago may be 100 times more important than something that happened yesterday, but your mind is going to be way more preoccupied than with the thing that happened yesterday, because it's recent, it's new, it's fresh. And there's literally hundreds of them. You can Google for them, you'll find descriptions. Now we're getting close to the end, and I want to talk about the limits of logic. The logical mind is not superpower. It is almost a superpower, but it's not total. There's times and places where logic doesn't work. A very clear one is just in a negotiation situation. So we want different things. We have different needs. You want to eat pizza, I want to eat burgers. Logic doesn't have a place in here. It's not about putting the calories and the nutrients on a whiteboard. That's not what we care about. I just want burgers and want pizza. We want different things. This is not a logical conversation. This is a negotiation. Well, you can approach the conversation logically, but that's a different thing. That's another layer on top of the layer. But this is a situation where we just want different things. And it's not like I'm going to prove to you that you should want what I want. You want what you want, I want what I want, right? Logic doesn't necessarily apply in these kinds of situations, especially if it's a zero-sum game, especially if we have to decide one or the other. If we could go to a place where they have both, fine. But if we have to choose a place where they only have one or the other, Another moment when logic doesn't really work very well is when in theory logic would work, but because of all kind of social things, which I'm not going to get into detail here. Some people have personalities which makes them very afraid of conflict. And by conflict, I mean light conflict, any kind of contradictory conversation. And logic and rationality and objectivity is in a way, by definition, just a little bit conflictual. Because if we're aiming to discover what is logically the best solution, what is the truth, so to say, we're going to disagree, we're going to come up with competing arguments, and one of us is going to be right and one of us is going to be wrong, to some extent. Some people don't do well in those kinds of conversations. They're maybe, shy or fragile from that point of view. Sometimes there's all kind of other, this a dysfunctional team, bad management, bad leadership, everything is shit, nobody's motivated. Nobody's got the energy or the drive or the motivation to engage in complicated logical conversations. You just want to get it over as quickly as possible because they literally don't give a fuck. They just want to go home. Again, logic is not likely to work very well in these situations. Sometimes you deal with people who are very emotional. If they don't have the thing that, Plato and Aristotle talked about, which is just chill down, man, and conquer yourself first. They are very emotional and just go with it. Logic only works to a certain extent. So my advice to you is that you shouldn't be, if you want to practice having a logical mind and having a rational approach to things, you shouldn't be annoying about it. For example, I'm a vegan, but there's few things in this world that bore and annoy me more than militant vegans, activists in general. I'm just taking this example. So you don't want to be that motherfucker who's like in every conversation, like, somebody says something like, that's an illogical decision to make. You shouldn't choose what clothes you buy based on that because that's not rational. Come on, man, we're just having a beer, we're enjoying ourselves. It's not the time for this, right now. So the way to be logical is first and foremost yourself. Understand there's limits to logic. Not all the time you can make a logical decision because some situations are very complicated. There's a lot of information. You don't have all the information. The situation is changing all the time. So you kind of have to go on instinct too at some point. And also in terms of influencing those around you, the best way to influence them is typically not to preach about it, not to annoy them with it, not to become a militant logical thinker, but to demonstrate it as an example through how you approach things and how you solve things. And that's the logical mind. And I think we need more of it. Cheers.